In this video, we are going to solve a compound OR inequality, and we're also going to solve a compound AND inequality. Let us start with solving compound OR inequalities. We are given two inequalities, and we want to solve and unite them as our final solution. So our first problem, we have 2x minus 3 all over 4 is less than or equal to 2. So I'm going to bring the 2 over to the left side and solve. So I'm going to say 2x minus 3 all over 4 minus 2 is less than or equal to 0. Now I need to add them together. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by a 4 in order to get a common denominator. So we have 2x minus 3 minus 8 all over 4 is less than or equal to 0, which means we have 2x minus 11 over 4 is less than or equal to 0. If I multiply both sides by 4, we get 2x minus 11 is less than or equal to 0. And if we add 11 to both sides, we get 2x is less than or equal to 11. And then we're going to divide both sides by 2. So we get x is less than or equal to 11 halves. So if we were to put this in interval notation, we would say it's from negative infinity to 11 halves. And we put a bracket because we are including the 11 halves. And if we were to graph it, we would start at 11 halves and then write a bracket and draw an arrow all the way out to the left. Okay, so now we want to look at our second inequality and do the same thing. So we get 4 minus 3x over 2 minus 2 is greater than or equal to 0. And I need a least common denominator, which is 2, so I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by a 2. So we get 4 minus 3x minus 4 all over 2 is greater than or equal to 0, which means we get negative 3x over 2 is greater than or equal to 0. And if I multiply both sides by the reciprocal, then we get x is less than or equal to 0. Be careful here, we must flip the signs because we are getting rid of the negative sign on the left side of the inequality. So anytime you are dividing or multiplying by a negative number, you must flip the signs. So if I were to put that in interval notation, we would say from negative infinity to 0, and you would put a bracket. And if I were to graph it, I would start at 0 and then I will use a bracket and come all the way out to negative infinity. Now, since we have an OR, so we are solving compound OR inequalities, you are going to take the two graphs and you are going to unite them. So in this case, we have a situation where we have 0 and we also have 11 over 2. So the first graph started from 11 halves all the way to negative infinity, and the second one started from 0 all the way to negative infinity. And if I were to unite them, then we will say that both of them together is from negative infinity to 11 halves with a bracket. And that is how you solve a compound OR inequality. Now let's look at how to solve compound AND inequalities. Again, we have two inequalities and we want to solve them both and take the interval that they have in common. So looking at our first one, so we have 2 times x plus 1 plus 3 minus 1 is greater than or equal to 0. Now I'm just going to go ahead and distribute the 2, so we get 2x plus 2 plus 3 minus 1 is just 2. and then we get greater than or equal to 0. So now I'm just going to add like terms. So we get 2x plus 4 is greater than or equal to 0. So we're going to say 2x is greater than or equal to negative 4. Then we're going to divide both sides by 2. So we get x is greater than or equal to a negative 2. And if I were to put that in interval notation, I will say negative 2 to infinity. And I would put a bracket because we are including the 2. And if I were to graph that, I would put a negative 2 on the number line and then use a bracket and draw it all the way to positive infinity. Now let's look at the other inequality. So I'm just going to bring the negative 6 over, and at the same time I'm going to go ahead and distribute the 2. So we get 4 minus 2x plus 6 is greater than 0, which means we get negative 2x plus 10 is greater than 0. And so if I subtract 10 from both sides, we get negative 2x is greater than negative 10, which means we have x is less than a 5. Be careful again, we are dividing by a negative number, which means we must flip the sign. Be sure to remember that. So if I were to put this in interval notation, we get negative infinity to 5. And this time we do not use a bracket, we use a parentheses because we are not including the 5. And if I were to graph that, we will put a 5 on the number line, and instead of a bracket, we will use a parentheses and draw it out to negative infinity. Now we have a and, not a or. So with an and, we are going to take the two intervals that they have in common. So on the number line, we have a 5 and we also have a negative 2. So for the first graph, we started from negative 2 all the way to infinity. And on the second graph, we started from a 5, but not including the 5, all the way to negative infinity. So the interval that we have in common is going to be the section right there. So we say our solution is from negative 2 to 5.